Welcome back to another episode of Out of Bounds on the Boomer Bust channel, a podcast where I give my social commentary on different topics in today's society. I'm your host, Terry, and today I wanted to talk a little bit about affirmative action. Obviously, with everything going on, we're having a lot of discussions about equity, oppression, power, race, all that. And so I've done my fair share of those conversations and will continue to. But this is one that I think is also very important to the larger conversation of how do we move forward. So for me, I started out, and for the most part, I started out with very strong feelings about affirmative action, and as well as most people. I do believe, in my opinion, that a lot of times we want to fight fire with fire, and we justify some of the actions with, well, this person did it, so we get to do it. And I think, especially when you're trying to solve something that's very complex, that's kind of counterintuitive. I don't think you can make things work by doing exactly what or I don't think you can reverse something by doing exactly what the people did to put it in place. And so for me, it was just, I'm like, I don't know that we really solve anything by affirmative action, by saying that, hey, you have to hire people of a certain background. And for me, I'm thinking, well, the people that got to power, obviously they used their ability to oppress other people to get there, but they didn't have to have it handed to them. And you're now saying, well, we got to hand it to other people so that they can make, some change and make some steps forward. But does that ever establish any credibility? And we've seen that play out, because if you say, well, I got here, now acknowledging privilege and the history of it, but I got here seemingly in my head by my own volition. And now this person is getting here just because they're African American or a minority or whatever. I don't feel like that's fair. And so if someone's coming at it with that lens, naturally they're going to be like, well, they don't have the same credibility I have. Like, I had the prerequisite requirements or whatever, and that was it. I didn't have to have a certain status or identity to get chosen. And so we've seen that's what happened over the years. A lot of people felt that way, that it was just not fair. And so obviously we've seen this play out in a number of different areas, whether it be in corporate world, whether it be in college selection and all these different things. And one of the other side effects is that you start to get this idea of a quota, where it's like, okay, well, we're mandating that you be more diverse, that you think about representing the population better. Okay, well then what's the number that I have to get to be quote unquote diverse, or quote unquote representing the population? And so instead of opening up the way we look at candidates and the way we think about it, some people, not everybody, but we just went to, okay, well, let me just hire the amount that'll, get me to satisfy the quota, and you'll leave me alone. Then I can go back to doing what I was doing. And so you have this idea again where the people in power aren't changing their practices. They're only doing the bare minimum of what they have to do so that they can continue to do what they were. And again, it's not a conversation of we're actually changing people's mindsets, and we're not addressing their biases. We're not really talking about historical impact. It's just turned into people just trying to fulfill a number. And then even as we get now in 2020, it's people trying to use it as a marketing tool to say, hey, look how diverse we are. But we're really not changing any hearts, any minds. And I heard the arguments for a long time, like, hey, the thing is, though, they might not change, but the few people that get opportunities because of this are now in position to make some change, or hopefully they get in the position to make some change. They at least had the opportunity to get through the door when they never would have got it before. And I understand that, but that's both processes are slow, but that's a very slow process. And again, how effective is it? Obviously, there's people that have done things, but really, how effective is it when people don't find you credible? And obviously, I'm not saying that everybody that is hired is underqualified, but people will then have that assumption. And again, when we generalize things, we always have problems, but that's how humans are. And so I've seen it in a number of places. I mean, there's certain academic programs where I've talked with students and they're like, hey, the fact of the matter is all the people that are struggling with our program, that's very selective, are people that are minority. And it's like, okay, well, that's a very rough statement to make. But then they say, well, like, we all know each other's scores and all that. They also were ones that got in with way less scores than the average person. And so if I had that score, I wouldn't have been able to get in to the program, but they did because they have minority status. And so that's a fair point to bring up. Like, some people will try to shut that down, but it's a very fair point to bring up. I don't think the student was absolutely right in that case, but I do think it's a fair point to bring up because, once again, it shows that even if that was true in that situation, what do you think that student's going to go on to think in their professional life? And when they see things like that again, they're going to have that negative stigmatism, like, okay, you just are an affirmative action hire, the token type, and now you think they're underqualified. So again, for me, it never made sense that this was the approach. And so some people will say, well, what else is there to do? And I get that. But anyway, that's the way I came at it from. And then recently, in the last few years, going through my master's program, I had the opportunity to take a law class, and we talked more about the actual legal premise behind it. And they talked about how courts justify affirmative action because of basically the damage done by our history, the historical damage done to certain people in this country. And this is basically a means to counteract that. So even in our law system, and it's funny how some people try to say reverse racism and all this stuff, but even in our justice system, it's recognized that the damage done over the course of our history in this country is identified and it has to be actively combated. And so for me, that loosened up a little bit, where it's like, okay, this is very intentionally to combat the effects done by racism and slavery and other things. And so I understand that part. And then I think recently I really started to come around to it, where a couple people I listened to, Charlemagne, one of them, said that if the system in the country was responsible for causing these injustices and deficiencies, then it should be on the system in the country to fix it. And that completely changed my opinion really fast. Because I still understand and believe that, yeah, it's probably not the most effective way, as in we're not really changing people's minds because we're not having any conversations, especially, with a lot of the changes happening now where people are bending to things that are pro-black. And again, it just becomes surface level, performative. We talk about that a lot now. And it's like, what's deeper than that? And yeah, people will do things in this compliance, like I always say, but they're not actually buying into anything. They're not changing the way they think. But I also recognize that while it might take a different approach and a lot of work to actually work towards getting rid of racism and really having those conversations about prejudice and bias, it's not up to us. I mean, we definitely as people are going to work to make the communities what we want to see, but it's not up to us. I think that statement is so true, that this system is what caused this issue. And so why shouldn't we lean on the resources, and why shouldn't we leverage the capital that the system has to rectify the situation? Because in this conversation, like I said, I get on the optics why people don't like it, but then there's some people that try to blatantly discredit or ignore the effects that got us here. Now that part, there's no wavering from me. It's not a suggestion or an opinion. It's an objective fact that systematically racism was perpetrated in this country to oppress people that were not white. And so you talk about the years and the effort, the multiple efforts to defame the black skin and the Africans, and to dehumanize them, and to create structures that limited what they could do after they were set free. And those are all documented. When we talking about redlining and property, not letting people live in certain places, segregation. When you're talking about the ability to afford loans or to get equity from banks, and how people, there were legislation in place a lot of times where you couldn't. And people were highly discouraged not to give out equity to African American people and other minorities. Then you're talking about voter suppression. You're talking about all types of things that we've seen in this country that has led to this point, because we hear the ugly truth sometimes. Like, again, the whole black on black crime is a true thing, has nothing to do with holding cops accountable. Nothing to do. Like, that argument makes no sense. But people will say, okay, well, if you look at the statistics, African Americans more likely to be in criminal activity, more likely to do this, whatever, have confrontation with cops, blah, blah, blah. African Americans, videos of them doing this. All those are hard truths that I accept. And it's not to excuse them, but you can't talk about that without talking about how we got to that point. When you talking about people that were oppressed to a point and impoverished to a point where they were forced to find other means because they didn't have the standard access. And then you're talking about legislation and policing and law enforcement that then gave the green light to incarcerate on a mass level people, to turn them into basically indentured workers inside the private prison system. So we have to acknowledge all those things. And when I do that, I have to agree that the system put us here. It should be. And then I get it, like people like welfare, and people are talking about, like I said, affirmative action. People talk about a lot of these programs that are in scholarships and things that are targeted specifically for minorities. And they're just like, well, how is that helping? You're just handing out stuff, and that's not going to make people any better. I think people aren't all the same. So yes, there's going to be people that abuse it and that don't grow from it. But then there's people like me. There's people like other colleagues I have. There's people that I've met throughout the world where somebody had to give you a chance. And those people took it and ran with it. And they created a legacy where they're helping other people. And so to sit here and say it's all negative is not true. And to sit here and say it's all positive is not true. But what also is not true is to say that this is a problem we got to fix. That's not true, because we didn't create the problem. Racist people and a racist system created the problem. And so with affirmative action, I do think there's a larger conversation. But as I sit today, I do fall onto the side of yes, not just affirmative action, but a lot of other things. When we talk about reparations, when we talk about, giving certain people access to equity and loans, when we're talking about like making the rules different for certain people, for a while, I was just like, that doesn't make sense. But I changed my tune on that, because the rules was different for us in the history, and that's why we're here. And so I, in a simple sentence, really flipped my thoughts on it. And so I am, as I sit today, I understand the necessity for affirmative action and other things like it, where you have to infuse the help into a society and the communities that you destroy. And so, but that doesn't mean it's all on people and we should just sit back and let people fix our lives. Obviously, everybody has to play a part in that too, and helping themselves go forward. But that's how I feel. So go to the comment section. Let me know what you think. Share it around. Get the conversation started. Thumbs up, subscribe, and thank you for going out of bounds.